Love across centuries and faith traditions, humankind has sought meaning in suffering. While some religious worldviews claim that souls choose hardships before birth for spiritual growth, a more nuanced and ethically responsible theology contends that true spiritual excellence resides not in acceptance of all suffering as fate, but in the cultivation of love, compassion, and accountability. Modern spiritual discourse increasingly recognizes that reframing pain as divinely mandated not only imperils the vulnerable, but also neglects the core tenets of moral development established by the world as great religions. The doctrine that every affliction is chosen or meant to be encourages a form of spiritual bypassing wherein genuine harm is ignored or rationalized. This framework can blunt righteous indignation, discourage protective intervention, and foster resignation. It is dangerous precisely because it subtly encourages adherents to excuse, ignore, or even sanctify grave injustices, ranging from illness to abuse and systemic wrongs. Such rationalizations erode the critical impulse for activism and justice that forms the ethical heart of religious tradition. Classical moral philosophy and modern scriptural interpretation both stress that evil inflicted upon innocents cannot be justified as spiritually necessary. Jewish, Christian, and Islamic scholars have repeatedly argued that redemptive suffering must never be conflated with divinely sanctioned harm. Instead, the highest religious ideals insist that the meaning of suffering emerges from communal solidarity, acts of compassion, and the pursuit of justice, not from resignation to the status quo. Imperative of accountability. Within responsible theologies, accountability, both individual and collective, is integral. A society that reframes suffering as a lesson rather than a wrong will fail to cultivate empathy or rectify harm. Indeed, the imperative to seek justice, love mercy, and walk humbly, Micah 6:8, illustrates the expectation that wrongs be confronted with courage, not with acquiescence. Ethically mature communities do not use metaphysical claims to dull the reality of someone's pain. Instead, they honor grief, confront perpetrators, and remedy injustice whenever possible. This is why leading interfaith voices recognize that spiritual advancement is measured by the protection offered to the vulnerable, the accountability demanded of the powerful, and the persistent pursuit of good. Honor love lesson. The teachings of spiritual exemplars, whether expressed through the parable of the Good Samaritan, the Buddha's model of compassionate action, or the universal ethic of loving thy neighbor, make unequivocal that the ultimate spiritual attribute is love, not endurance of pain for its own sake. True holiness lies not in seeing suffering as cosmically assigned, but in becoming the healing presence that transforms suffering into hope and justice. If suffering has meaning, it is found not in its arbitrary occurrence, but in the opportunities it creates for generosity, solidarity, and transformative action. Redemptive narratives should always be coupled with a call to alleviate pain, hold wrongdoers accountable, and ensure that injustice does not persist unchallenged. Theological reflections on the divine and human freedom, a vision of the divine that delights in human suffering or requires pain. For growth contradicts the nature of love as described in most major faith systems. God is no spectator of pain. Rather, the divine is described in Jewish, Christian, Islamic, and other traditions as compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness in Exodus 34:6. Those who imagine otherwise risk constructing a theology that enables oppression and quiets the cry for justice. Human freedom and growth are better conceived as arising from agency and the capacity to choose kindness and compassion over cruelty or indifference. Spirituality achieves its highest purpose not by accepting harm as fate, but by empowering individuals and communities to act as blessings for each other, proactive, accountable, and loving, even and especially amid hardship. To claim that harm is divinely orchestrated is to risk silencing the prophetic voice that calls for justice, mercy, and love. Moral and spiritual greatness are attained by the choices to confront suffering with action, to demand accountability, and to create a world where love, not pain, marks the evidence of the divine among humanity. Authentic spirituality recognizes that this life, and each person's suffering or triumph within it, matters deeply. The true measure of souls is not the endurance of affliction, but the capacity to insist on kindness, justice, and compassion, thus refusing to let any theology become a tool for excusing harm. It is in becoming a blessing to others, especially when there is nothing to gain, that the highest spiritual purpose is fulfilled.